Here with Brittany Carpenter, owner of Dietitian Brittany and creator of the Gut Hormone Connection Summit. And for those who don't know you, tell us a little bit about your background and practice.
Yeah, so I am a registered dietitian. I was really fed up in the hospital system and traditional healthcare with how people just weren't getting better. And we weren't helping people be better, right? We were just kind of sticking band-aids on things and waiting until it turned into a disease. And then we would intervene, right? Like, oh, now you have diabetes. Now let's talk about it. And I just couldn't help but see how backwards that was, right? So as a dietitian, I'm like, there has to be a better way. So then I got into functional medicine, got a master's degree in human nutrition and functional medicine, where I really felt like for the first time, we were actually making an impact on people's health, right? Like we were actually seeing changes. We weren't just telling them to like not eat that food or whatever else. We were helping them feel their best for the first time in several decades, right? So got on that path and I was like, oh my gosh, this is my calling, right? And then I got really passionate about women's health. After having two babies, I just got so passionate about specifically moms, but all women really, and how we live our lives and how when we have symptoms, we go to doctors and they are largely dismissed. And maybe that's the case for men. I'm not saying it's not the case for men, but I think I saw firsthand working in, those clinics in traditional healthcare, how when a woman had a complaint, they were almost labeled as whiny or hormonal or, they're lying. If they're saying I can't lose weight and I'm doing all the things, instead of really investigating like, okay, what could be going on here? It was like, they're probably sneaking something at night. They're probably being dishonest about what they're eating. And that narrative just really angered me, right? Like, why is it that we're dismissing people and saying your lived experience in your body can't be true because I know better than you and you must be wrong? Like, that's wild. And that is the narrative. And so I'm like, I got to get out of here, right? And I had this passion to really help women feel heard, feel understood, and then really find them answers. I've always had a passion for gut health. So I think naturally I kind of moved towards gut health. I saw it as just this up and coming, emerging trend that everyone was going to start realizing how important gut health and the microbiome is to overall health. And I was right. So luckily I had that foresight. I'm not right all the time, but luckily that was one where it turned out well. And then helping women with hormone issues, because again, I find that because they're things that aren't normally tested, they are things that are dismissed often, or there isn't a great way to test the hormones that we might want to test. And so again, it creates all of these symptoms around like vague symptoms, fatigue, depression, anxiety, all I'm trying to think of some other ones. I mean, even complaining about periods, right? My periods are painful and women are met with that's a normal part of being a woman. That's a normal part of aging. You're a mom, of course you're tired. Like those are not answers. So it's really infuriating if you're going to your doctor for answers and that's what you're hearing back. Where are you supposed to turn? And that's exactly why I started doing what I do. And just so much of what I do is helping women feel heard and understood for the first time in a really long time. And that's kind of how this summit was born as well. Yeah.
Speaking of the summit, today will be the first of two presentations that you're putting on here. Today, we're
Mhm.
talking all about the microbiome. So to kick things off, can you explain why gut health is so central to overall well-being, and what is it about the microbiome that affects so many systems in the body?
I think it's something that more people are hearing. Again, it used to be something people just didn't even know what the microbiome was. So I think that's a really great place to start. So when you think about your body and think back to biology class for a second with me. So you think of your organ systems, right? Are made up of organs, and the organs are made up of tissues, and the tissues are made up of cells, right? So at the most basic part of being a human being, we're made up of these tiny microscopic little cells, everything in our body. So when you look at the amount of cells in your body compared to the amount of, well, the DNA from those cells, and you look at the DNA on and in our bodies from bacteria, it is a 1-to-1 ratio. So the amount, I'm going to repeat that in a different way because I think it's mind blowing. So the amount of bacterial DNA you have on and around your body right now is pretty similar to the amount of human DNA you have right now as well. So the question is like, And I think it actually weighs a little bit more heavily on the bacteria. So the question is, are we more human or are we more bacteria? It's pretty remarkable when you think about it, right? So are we the host or are we the whatever the opposite of host is, right? Like, are the bacteria the host and we're just along for the ride? So it's fascinating to think about, if we are a 1-to-1 ratio with bacteria, do we think those bacteria are important and play a part in health and disease? Absolutely. Right. So also when you think about the microbiome, generally we think about the gut microbiome. We think about what are the bacteria and the yeast and the parasites that are growing in our gut. But every part of your body has a unique microbiome. So you have a skin microbiome. You have a mouth microbiome, which is different than what's inhabiting your colon, which is different than what's in the small intestine. So it's fascinating and so complex. So I think that's going to be an emerging thing that we're seeing. Actually, right now we're doing stool testing. So we're looking at, the GI tract and saying, okay, what's growing and what's not growing there, and what do we want to be growing there? What are we missing? And I think we're going to see that with skin too. You even look at acne, how many people struggle with acne, and we have an amazing presentation on acne coming up. But is it a bacterial issue coming from the gut, or is it a bacterial issue that's actually more surface level on the skin? Right? I don't know. It's maybe a little bit of both. And it's fascinating to think that where research is going to take us in terms of this kind of secret life of bacteria that's all around us. So the microbiome, when I talk about the microbiome in these presentations, I'm mostly going to be referring to the gut microbiome, just to clear up. But again, remember that you have bacteria everywhere, even on your scalp, right? Like even on your head, it's different than everywhere else on your body. So it really is remarkable, and I don't think we appreciate it. It does kind of sound like a horror movie, like, bacteria are taking over, but I think we need to learn how to live in harmony with them and understand that they're just a massive part of this health picture. There are things you can do to optimize it, which is kind of what we're going to talk about today, right? Again, the microbiome is different in all the different parts, but when you think about that big giant tube, that is how things from our outside world get into our body. It is one of the only ways. Of course, you could argue, of course, things can come through the skin and you can inhale them, but largely it's coming through your GI tract. So you can imagine if there are things outside or things in our food supply, we need a really robust defense in our gut to keep things that we don't want absorbed into our body out. And we want to make sure that we are extracting everything from the food that we're eating. Right? And your microbiome, the bacteria that are present and not present in your gut, really influence even down to, and I think we talk about this in a future session, even talking about how many calories you're extracting from your food can be dependent on what bacteria is growing and not growing in your gut. Just creating inflammation. There's good bacteria, there's bad bacteria, and there's kind of neutral bacteria that's just kind of hanging out, right? But those bad bacteria, if overgrown, if they're in the presence of not high levels of good bacteria, and there's other things in the mix, they can create inflammation on their own. So inflammation, I think, is a good, we kind of almost need to take a derailment here, and then hopefully we'll bring it back to bacteria. But we have to talk about inflammation if we're talking about any dysfunction in the body, because inflammation is truly where it all starts. So, a big, people have mostly heard of inflammation by now. It used to be something that people had not heard of, and now people are pretty familiar, but I want to kind of take it back to the basics because it's such an important thing to understand. So inflammation is a completely normal body process. We need inflammation. If you think about the last time that you had a cut on your knee or something, wherever, remember how it gets kind of red on the outside. It might be a little bit, we call it inflamed. It's red, it's puffy, it's hot, right? That is inflammation at work, and it's a good thing. We need inflammation in the body. The purpose is to heal and repair, and that's a good thing. Where it goes wrong is when what we call chronic low-grade inflammation. So what that means is you're a little bit inflamed all the time, which is very different than getting a cut or a scrape where you're a lot inflamed for a short amount of time, right? And another way that I kind of describe this sometimes is, so if I have my arm here, right, and I have my finger really lightly, and I'm just kind of scraping it very lightly over my arm. If I do this for 5 minutes, It would be weird, right? You'd be like, what are you doing? But it's not going to create a huge issue. It's not going to be this big gaping wound. But what if I applied that same pressure just a little bit and I did this for a whole week? I would have a huge problem, right? It would be this big gaping wound. And it still came from something that was really small, right? It was a little bit of pressure, it was a little bit of inflammation, but compounded over a really long period of time, you're going to have a massive issue. And that's where we run into problems with inflammation. So, again, we need inflammation, but we don't want that chronic low grade inflammation. And one of the things that can cause that chronic low grade inflammation is a dysregulated gut. And when you have inflammation coming from a dysregulated gut, it affects all of the other organ systems because that chronic low grade inflammation influences every organ system. So that's where we start to see even connections with heart disease and plaque buildup, joint pain, autoimmune flares, fatty liver disease. All of those things can be very related to the gut microbiome. So it's not enough to say, I poop every day, it's cool, it's all sunshine and rainbows, my stomach never really hurts, I think I'm good. I think that's great news. And it might be that your gut is in great, really great shape. But it doesn't mean that there isn't something deeper going on. If you do have flared autoimmunity, you've got heart issues, you've got fatty liver disease and whatever else. So it really is so central to optimal health. And if you have a dysregulated gut, you will not be in optimal health. So I think it's such an important topic, especially when it comes to hormones as well. I think it's important to understand what a normal bowel pattern is, because how do you know if you have dysfunction if you don't know what the normal is? So ideally you're having 1, 2, 3 bowel movements a day. I'd say the most optimal is 1 to 2 bowel movements per day. Once we get up to the 3 range, sometimes there can be issues with what we call complete evacuation. So is it that you're not able to get it all out at one time? And is that why we're having so many? But again, it can be a variation of normal, but ideally 1 to 2 bowel movements a day. If you're not having a daily bowel movement, it's only important because that when you think about what's packaged in the stool, it's all the things in the body that your body is like, hey, this is trash, it's garbage, let's get it out. Or we have too much of this, let's go ahead and get the rest out of the body. That is the exit, the trash can, if you will, for your body to say, get this out right now. So if that stuff is hanging out for a week in your colon, that's really problematic because that's stuff that should have been gone a week ago, right? And the longer something sits in the colon, the longer your body has to absorb whatever is in the stool. That's actually why when you lean more towards constipation, how the stool is hard and pebbly and hard to pass. It's because it's been sitting there for so long that your body, if not properly hydrated, has pulled all of the water out of the stool. That's what makes the stool harder, right? And the opposite is true too. When you have loose stools, generally what that means is it was moving too quickly through your GI tract and your body didn't have time to absorb the water out to give you a fully formed stool, right? So that's kind of the why behind what might make it harder or mushier. But in terms of consistency, what you're looking for, obviously you don't want really mushy and you don't want really hard. It needs to be easy to pass and it needs to ideally come out in kind of one long log, if you will, for lack of a better word, right? And that's when you know that you've made it, right? That's the sunshine and rainbow poo, easy to pass. And that would be what normal consistency would be. You also want it to, again, be easy to pass. There should be no discomfort. You shouldn't have to sit there for hours. We have a pelvic floor PT who's going to come on and talk a little bit more about that as well. But that would be kind of the goal when it comes to bowel movements.
People looking to optimize their gut health, like what are some dietary shifts or other types of foods that would make the biggest impact?
So I think, as a society right now, people are always looking for what should I not be eating? Like they want to be told rules of something, right? Like if I have gut issues, it must be a food that I'm eating that I should not be eating. That is where everyone's mind goes to. And sometimes that's the case and sometimes it's not. I really like to focus more on what are you missing from your diet and what do we need to add in to support your gut? Because how do we think our gut is going to function optimally for us if we're not giving it the nutrients it needs, if it can't heal and repair on its own, if the immune system isn't supported? I mean, it's not going to happen. And so when you get these diets that are all about what not to eat, It's really problematic because your bacteria are so varied in your gut. You have so many different types, and they all like a different type of food, right? So if you're down to eating 5 foods, which we see often in clients that come to us, when we do a stool test, it is so your good populations are decimated. They are all low because you've not been feeding them the food that they like. So I think in terms of, again, when we look at foods not to eat, it really is more of a broad habit situation. It's not like having an Oreo every once in a while is going to really negatively affect your microbiome. The problem is if you're having, a sleeve of Oreos after a dinner that was pizza, and then lunch you skipped because you were busy. Breakfast was a croissant with a sugary Starbucks coffee, right? The problem isn't the Starbucks coffee. The problem isn't the croissant. It's none of those things on its own. It's the pattern. So really establishing what is an optimal diet like for you? What is, are you getting enough variety of plants? Are you getting enough protein? That's really what we look at when we're looking at our clients' diets. And then if we want to take that a step further, we're looking at fiber. Are you getting fiber? And I just posted a reel about this the other day, but even an entire plate of salad, say you have an entire 2 cups of lettuce with a couple of little cherry tomatoes on there, because that's the most basic salad, it's like 3 grams of fiber. People think it's like, oh, I've hit my fiber for the day because I had a salad at lunch. And it really is not significant in fiber. The general recommendation, a good rule of thumb, is around 25 grams of fiber per day. So you can see how just having a salad for lunch is 3 out of the 25 grams of fiber that you need. And if you're just having that same lettuce every day, those same tomatoes, you're not feeding all of the other good bacteria that you need. So what we do is we want variety. If you want to get really nerdy about it, I have a client who I love working with, and is he like a space engineer or something? Like he does this anyway, his brain like works in spreadsheets. So he has like literally a spreadsheet for variety. You don't have to get that into it, but just thinking, how can I get the most varied amount of plants as possible? And this can be as simple as you always buy bell peppers for the week and you typically buy green, but this week you're going to buy red or you're going to buy yellow, right? So you can even vary the color of the type of plant. Or it could be, I always buy grapes and I always buy apples at the store. Okay, well, let's get some berries in there. Let's try some plums. Just instead of grabbing what you always go to, step out of your comfort zone a little bit. And it doesn't have to be overwhelming. It can be, okay, this week I'm going to add 1 new plant to my diet. The next week, that one went well. I'm going to keep that. This next week, I'm going to try this new plant in my diet. And it's a great way to get kids involved too. You can have that be their job. Hey, go in the produce section and I want you to pick out something that you've never seen before and we're going to figure out how to cook with it. Like kids love that because there's some funky looking things in the produce department. But variety is key and fiber is key. And so focusing on the foods that have the most fiber per serving. So that's going to be things like berries, nuts, flaxseed, chia seed. Avocado is remarkably high in fiber, which people don't think about. Even things like cooking and cooling your grains and your potatoes is an excellent way to increase what we call resistant starch in the food. And that is a starch that the bacteria will thrive on. We cannot break down resistant starch. It's why it's called resistant starch. We as humans don't have the enzymes necessary to do it. We rely on our bacteria to do it. So you can imagine if we're dropping down food that they love, they're going to be like, this place is great. Let's repopulate. Let's grow, right? We're going to stay forever. But if instead you're depriving them of all of the foods that they love, they're probably not going to stick around. They're not going to reproduce because they're not in an environment that they love. So much of what we do is we want to cater our gut environment to be a space that those bacteria want to stay and grow, right? The good bacteria. We don't want it to be a place where that bad bacteria will overgrow.
Speaking of diets, this low FODMAP diet is recommended. It's been popular these days. What is it and is it effective? I've heard of it, but
Yeah. So if you have gut issues, this probably pops up on your Instagram algorithm all the time because it is the number one thing that is recommended to people with IBS. And it is the number one thing that I recommend people not do with IBS. And here's why. So FODMAP stands for, it's a bunch of different names for things that are highly fermentable, a bunch of different types of fiber that are very fermentable for the gut. So if you have gut dysregulation, you have something most of the time called visceral hypersensitivity. And that basically means that even the normal gut functions that are happening in your body, you really feel. So it might feel painful to you where the same body functions are happening in your spouse and they don't feel it because they don't have that hypersensitivity. So that's kind of one of the mechanisms around IBS, and that might be something you're experiencing. So if your gut bacteria are fermenting foods, they are producing gas. And if you're hypersensitive, you're going to feel that and you're going to interpret it as pain. So it is recommended to people to eliminate the gas production that's happening, which can eliminate bloating and pain. So on first glance, you're like, well, that sounds great. How could you ever be against that? That sounds like a cure-all. Here's the problem. FODMAP, a high FODMAP diet is a diet that bacteria love. So just like we mentioned before, when we feed our gut bacteria food that they love, they're going to stay. If we deprive them of it, if we take away all of those high FODMAP foods, yes, your symptoms are going to go away, but so are your good bacteria because you've taken away their favorite food source. They want to ferment foods, right? And so what we see, because we do a lot of stool tests on clients, and we've seen so many clients who've been on a low FODMAP or similarly restricted diet for a long time, and they have the worst stool tests, right? They're the ones that are like, I'm doing everything right. I'm doing everything my doctor told me. I haven't eaten all of these foods, this list of 50 foods in a decade. Why do I still feel miserable? And it's because what started as a way to help their symptoms, it was never actually getting to the root cause of the issue. So the helping their symptoms, they thought this is working, right? This is what I need to be doing because my symptoms are going away. That is not the same as healing. It's very different. And I think that that issue right there is what gets people in trouble, because then they think, well, I'm doing everything right. Why am I still miserable? It's because they never got to the root of the issue. They instead took away the foods that took away the symptoms, but it actually created further issues down the line because now their good bacteria are in the toilet, quite literally, because they came out, right? They're dying off, and then you have an overgrowth of the bad bacteria or the opportunistic bacteria, because if you have less good bacteria in your gut, you now have opportunity for those bad bacteria, the opportunists, to come in and overgrow. So sometimes I'll explain it like, imagine an arena, right? We want most of the seats filled with the people that are going to be the most well-behaved, right? We want all of them there. But if you're not serving their favorite pizza, or they don't like the snacks you're providing, they don't like the music, they're going to leave, right? And the ones that are like, let's party, let's make chaos, they will thrive in any environment. They don't care that the food is bad. They don't really care that the music is bad. They're just happy to be there, and they are going to fill up more seats because the good guys have left, right? So that creates this picture of imbalance. So it started with you were trying to fix your symptoms, so you eliminated all of these foods. Your symptoms went away, but while that was happening, your good bacteria went away as well. So now not only do you have less good bacteria, but you have an overgrowth of bad bacteria. That's why your symptoms come back, because we see that too. I did low FODMAP. I felt great for 5 years. And then all of a sudden, all of my symptoms came back, even though I wasn't eating those foods. Well, yeah, it's because of that deeper imbalance that happened, and you never fixed the problem in the first place. The low FODMAP diet was just a Band-Aid approach to your symptoms. And honestly, if you've not looked, so a low FODMAP diet quite honestly sucks, right? The amount of foods you cannot eat is enormous. You can't even cook with onions. You can't cook with garlic. Try eating out if you can't have onions and garlic, right? It's in everything. And foods, another thing that I'll talk about too is you think, your body is remarkable. It can heal, it can repair. If you're a woman, it can birth babies and then provide it food for an entire year of life. But you think your body can't handle an onion? That's wild, right? It's not that your body can't handle an onion. It's that your gut is dysregulated and reacting to everything you put in it. That is the issue. So another way you can tell I really love analogies, because I think it's good to kind of drive the point home if you can visualize what I'm talking about. But if you think about, even food sensitivities in general, a lot of clients come to us saying, I started with gluten. I eliminated gluten. I felt better. Then I became intolerant to dairy. Then I became intolerant to eggs. Now I can't eat apples, and it's like, it's this cascade of food sensitivities. And what I explain is that the food was never the problem. It was a dysregulated gut. So if you can visualize your gut being on fire, right? Doesn't matter what you throw on it, it's going to ignite the flames. So you can keep pruning out and putting less things on the fire, and you might get a little bit of symptom resolution. But until you put out the fire itself, you're going to continue to react to all of the foods you're eating. So instead of saying, okay, well, selectively, we're only going to go throw these things on the fire because they seem to react less, we instead put the fire out. And then guess what? You stop reacting to all the foods that you're putting in your body because you fixed the root cause. And that's the beauty. People sometimes are like, how do you heal the gut if you're not removing foods? Well, because we're supporting the body to heal. We're fixing what the actual problem was in the first place. Because when you do that, there's no food elimination that you need to do. And I'm not saying we don't eliminate foods in some clients. With some clients, it is necessary. I'm not saying that if you have celiac disease that you should be eating gluten and dairy. No, you should not, right? There are people that have true lactose intolerance. There are times where you actually want to pull food out, but it should not be the first line of treatment in IBS. It just shouldn't be.
Makes sense. And it seems like food sensitivity tests are everywhere these days. You can I know you could probably get some over the counter. Some of them, you have to go through a doctor to get a prescription. What are your thoughts on those? Are they effective? Any warnings for people that are thinking about going in and getting one done?
Yeah, so I don't use them in practice, if that's any indication to what I think about them. And we have a gut healing community, and we just did a big thing on food sensitivities and did a one-on-one hot seat coaching session where we talked about this exact issue. She had a provider who ran this test, and then not only is she eliminating gluten and dairy and eggs already, but then her provider had her do this test, and now she can't eat 40 more foods. So you think that's adding stress? Like, this is wild. This is exactly the problem. So is saying, oh, you're eliminating this, it must be something else we need to eliminate. No, it's clearly not working, right? It has to be something else. So the food sensitivity tests on their own are not accurate. So they use something called IgG antibodies. And IgG antibodies, it's essentially, you can think of it like a little army that your immune system creates to kill things off. That's generally what antibodies mean. So the premise of the test is if your body is creating this IgG antibody to a food, it must mean that that your body doesn't like that food and you should stop eating it. That's the whole premise behind it, right? The problem is that when you look at the actual research, it does not support that having IgG antibodies to a particular food means that you're intolerant. There is some research to suggest that it might be actually flagging for tolerance, meaning your immune system is saying, oh, this is an apple. This is totally fine. Let's put a little tag on it so that next time we see this apple, we know that it's cool. We'll leave it alone, right? We won't panic. We won't go down this inflammatory cascade. So even the premise of if you have IgG antibodies to a food, it means it's bad is disproven. I mean, there's not research to support that. But let's assume that it is, for argument's sake. Let's say it is accurate to look at those antibodies and say, let's eliminate all the foods here. What often happens is that clients see on that test all of the foods that they eat daily, or maybe they ate lobster the night before and that showed up as reactive on the test, and they haven't had lobster in 5 years. Yesterday was the first time. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is so ironic because I just ate lobster. And I'm like, it's not so much ironic if you understand what's happening here. So if you have foods that you eat every day or that you had yesterday, sometimes that can be an indication that the food itself is not staying within the GI tract. It's leaking out into somewhere else. So there can be a connection there with what we call increased gut permeability, or you might have heard it as leaky gut, right? That's mostly how people hear that term. So the problem might be not that your body can't tolerate that lobster. The problem might be that the lobster has leaked out of your GI tract and is in places of the body that it should not be in. And then your immune system, of course, is going to mount an attack to that piece of lobster because it shouldn't be just floating around. It should be in the GI tract, right? So that can be a huge connection too. It can be, again, it's a deeper issue. Simply eliminating the foods on a food sensitivity test is a band-aid approach. You will never truly find gut healing with eliminating foods on a food sensitivity test. It won't happen because the problem is not the food. The problem is determining why you're reacting to that food in the first place. It is always a deeper issue. And another way to think about it, if you're like clinging to this test, like, no, this has to be the answer, right? I've had clients who have true lactose intolerance and it doesn't show up on the test. Like a true deficiency in an enzyme, meaning their body actually cannot tolerate dairy. It cannot tolerate lactose and it doesn't show up on the test. So I think that, and again, that's just anecdotal, I understand, but like, that is a massive problem. Or if you want to cling so tightly to your food sensitivity test, I challenge you to take another one today and compare them because they will be completely different.
And do these have to be prescribed, or are there over-the-counter versions available?
They are widely available, unfortunately. You can order them yourself. And
Amazon?
that can be really, probably,
Yeah.
yeah. So I am all for people being able to order their own things. I think it's a great thing. I think if you want to know something about your body, you shouldn't need a doctor's approval to get it. Like, I wish we could just walk in and get a scan somewhere. Like, hey, can I get an MRI? I don't know. Like, probably not. Obviously, there are problems with doing that too much.
You
So I
can,
understand why
yeah.
we...
Yeah, you can do
Yeah.
that. There's actually, where I'm at now in Texas, you can go in for the full body MRI, but it's like $15,000. So it's available to the public, but yeah, it's not accessible.
But
for
not
most
to
people,
everyone
so.
in the public.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
for sure. And so I do think it's important that we have the ability to know things about our body. But the problem is when you get something so complex as gut health, and then you're ordering the test yourself, you're left to your own devices to interpret that and know what to do with it. And there can be a lot of issues in the interpretation because it looks so simple. Oh, I'm just going to eliminate all of the foods in red and I'll add them back later, right? But you're missing the deeper root cause because here's what's going to happen. You're going to get to the end of that. You're going to eliminate all those foods for 90 days. You're going to one by one add them in one every 4 days or whatever it is. You're going to get to the end of that, maybe even a year later, and be like, I still have gut issues. Yeah, it's because you didn't fix the root cause. You just went down this entire rabbit hole of false promises. And it's infuriating as a practitioner to see that because there's so much money spent on that. There is so much stress around eliminating those foods. Another one of the big things that I do with clients is help them heal their relationship with food. Because by the time they come to us, they are terrified of food because they're constantly trying to figure out, okay, I was bloated today. What did I eat for breakfast? Okay, I was bloated when I woke up this morning. It must have been something I had for dinner, right? It's like food becomes the enemy because they're assuming that it must be a food they're eating that they're intolerant to, when it's actually just a deeper cause that creates this entire negative, again, relationship with food. And then we have to repair that because food should be enjoyed. Food is nostalgic. It's delicious. We gather with people with food. And I want you to be able to eat everything at a birthday party if you want, right? It shouldn't be the situation where you're like, okay, I know I'm going to be at my kid's birthday party. They're going to have pizza and cupcakes and I can't have gluten and I can't have dairy. So I guess I have to pack my own food to this kid's birthday party. No, nobody wants to live that way. Even if you like your food better, I want you to have the most free life when it comes to food and gut health. And that's our goal for our clients.
Sneak your food inside the piñata.
There you go.
Whack it
There you
open
go.
just to heat. Yeah. Another
Yeah.
big popular thing these days are probiotics. You can get them in all forms. They're like on every shelf. Walgreens, 7-Eleven, they're everywhere now. What exactly do they do? And should everybody be taking one? What's the deal with probiotics?
Yeah, so there's a lot of misconceptions around probiotics. And to be honest, when I was a little baby dietitian, like when I was just out and was not a specialist in gut health, I told everyone to do a probiotic. And my recommendation was just go find one on the shelf that has the most bacteria in it, like just find something with a lot. And I'm horrified now. And I think of that, I'm like, oh my gosh, those poor people so if you're watching this and I said that to you, I'm sorry. Here's my formal apology. But there's a lot of misconceptions. And honestly, it's fueled by doctors as well. So a lot of my clients with IBS-like symptoms, they went to their doctor for answers and they're met with eat more fiber, which can be helpful sometimes. It's not the whole picture, but okay, we're doing something, right? And go take a probiotic. Anything with lactobacillus will do, is generally what they say. And it's not helpful. So here's the thing with probiotics. I don't recommend them every day. I don't think people should be on a daily probiotic. And that shocks people because I am a gut health functional medicine dietitian. You would think I would be the poster child for telling people to do a daily probiotic. But we used to think that probiotics repopulated the gut. What I mean by that is we used to think that whatever I am ingesting in this little capsule, it's basically freeze-dried bacteria is what you're consuming. So we used to think that whatever is in that capsule, when I consume it, it is now going to be a permanent part of my gut microbiome. And there is no research to support that. We call that inoculation. It does not re-inoculate the gut. Doesn't mean it's not beneficial in certain situations, but that is not going to solve your gut issues. If you take a specific probiotic and your symptoms improve, I think that's beautiful. You happened upon the one type of probiotic that is exactly what your gut needed, and you don't need my permission to continue taking it. If you feel good on something, continue to do it. Unless it's something that's like long-term harmful, like drugs or something, right? We have to be realistic with ourselves here. But I think, again, if you're like Brittany, I started taking this and I feel amazing and I'm pooping every day, sunshine and rainbows, lovely. I love that journey for you and you should continue to do that. But for all of the people who are like, I have gone through 20 probiotics and none of them have helped, it's because that's not the root cause of your issue, right? So, probiotics also need to be strain specific, meaning that there needs to be some specificity to what are you trying to fix and which bacterial strain is going to do that fixing. So for example, first let's talk about how do you know if your probiotic is strain specific? Because a lot of the probiotic brands, really popular, expensive probiotic brands, don't even list the strain on the back of the package. And here's a good way to kind of think about this. So let's say that your doctor says, go get a probiotic with lactobacillus. That is as specific as saying, go get a dog. Okay, well, I know I'm going to go get a dog, but like, what kind do you want me to get? Do you want me to get like a bulldog breed? Do you want me to get a herding breed? I don't know anything about dogs, but you get what I'm saying? Like, what category should I get? Because it's not specific to say, go get lactobacillus, go get a dog. Okay, well, what kind? So then you want to be even more specific, like lactobacillus rhamnosus. That would be more specific. But even that is as specific as saying, go get a bulldog breed of dog. Okay, well, do you want me to get a boxer? Do you want me to get an English bulldog? Like, they're so different, right?
Frenchie.
A Frenchie. Oh my gosh, those are my favorite. When you're looking at, is my probiotic strain specific? A really good clue is if there are random numbers or letters at the end of the name. So for example, Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG is a strain. It is strain specific. That is the main bacteria in Culturelle products. That specific strain of bacteria has been beneficial in certain things like eliminating traveler's diarrhea, helping with antibiotic-associated diarrhea. So if you are on an antibiotic and you tend towards loose stools on antibiotics, I'm going to tell you, go to CVS or Walgreens and pick up Culturelle. Not because it's just the one that's popular, but because that particular strain is helpful for that. It doesn't mean that that probiotic is going to help you if you have constipation, right? So just because it's good for one thing doesn't mean it's good for another. That is why I don't have a favorite probiotic that everyone needs every day, because you want to match the probiotic to the symptom. And so I get questions a lot on Instagram of, hey, what probiotic is your favorite? And I'm like, Well, I have favorites, but again, it needs to be specific. So I think there's a lot of misinformation about that. But again, even if you got the correct one, the benefit to the probiotic is while you're taking it, you're creating healthy competition. Going back to that arena situation that we talked about before, you're temporarily filling seats. And then by the time those ones are ready to go home, you're dropping in another pill and the other ones are filling the seats, right? But if you stop dropping more in, eventually people are going home and there's going to be empty seats. So it's not going to make them permanently stay there, but it is a way to create healthy competition. And again, you do see benefits while it's passing through your GI tract, but it doesn't mean that if you're lacking lactobacillus in your gut before, that you can take a probiotic with lactobacillus and then magically for the rest of your life, you'll have lactobacillus in your gut. That's not how it works, even though that is how people think that it works. Does that make sense?
So can it be harmful then, as I've got, and who are not a sponsor of this summit, but I have Athletic Greens over here in the cabinet. I should go get it to read the back of it. And I've never paid attention to what's in there. It says probiotics. Of course, they've got all kinds of stuff in there. Will damage be done if somebody's taking the wrong type of probiotic over a long term? I know you say somebody's just taking something that they've taken forever. Could that actually have adverse effects?
Good question. Most of the time, the answer is going to be no. So that's the thing. It's like, is it going to harm you? Probably not, but it could be a giant waste of money as well. But there are certain situations where it could make things worse. And that is just so situational. Again, that goes back to, one of the things that I really want for my clients is I want them to be able to rely on their own body cues and listen to their body over an outside source. So what I mean by that is if you're taking a probiotic and it makes you feel great, but then you listen to this presentation and you're like, oh, I guess I shouldn't be taking it daily. No, you listen to your body. You listen to how your body responded to that thing. So for you, if you started taking that Athletic Greens powders, it doesn't matter if that probiotic, it doesn't even really matter if it's strain specific. If it's improving your gut symptoms, you don't need my permission to stay on it, right? But you need to really listen to your body cues, right? And say, okay, that made me feel worse when I was taking it. You don't need my permission to discontinue it. You can listen to yourself and say, when I started taking that, I felt this, and I felt horrible. Okay. So that sounds like it's probably not what your body needs. There are some situations where sometimes if you do have certain overgrowth of bacteria, like specific strains that are overgrown, that certain probiotics can disrupt it. But again, you would know, and you can just kind of rely on your body cues to say, okay, let's give that one a rest.
I know for sure that makes sense. Yes. Another big thing that's been in the news lately has been, the talk of the gut-brain connection. They've done recent studies. I think they've determined that out of our more nerve endings in the gut and the brain of anywhere else, and everything's very interconnected now. There's been some very, very large breakthroughs lately on that. So with that in mind, your thoughts on the gut-brain connection, on recent things or previous clients and the way that some of these cases have played out?
Yeah, so it's actually a really interesting connection because it's what we call bidirectional, meaning that your gut influences your brain and your brain influences your gut. So it's one of those chicken or the egg, cart before the horse, like maybe not cart before the horse, but you get what I'm saying, like which one is causing which. And it's both when it comes to your gut brain axis. And I think it's really fascinating because when clients come to us, they have miserable gut symptoms and they're like, I will do literally anything you tell me to heal. Like, tell me what to do. Eat grass all day. Cool. I'll do it. Right. But then you say, I need you to manage your stress. And they're like, yeah, I don't think so. Like, do you have anything else? Like, I'll do anything else. But something about stress we cling to as human beings. And it is fascinating because it's like, don't we all want to be less stressed? I think we would verbalize that we want to be less stressed. But when push comes to shove, we're like, yeah, I'd rather take a pill, right? I'd rather do an extreme food elimination to heal my gut. And there's that disconnect of understanding how the brain really impacts the gut. And so sometimes my clients, they're like, why are we talking so much about stress? Aren't we talking about my gut? Right? And I'm like, yeah, exactly. But I have clients do sometimes an experiment to see how much is their brain affecting their gut, how much is their anxiety, their stress, their inability to relax, they're not having anything joyous in their life. That's huge too. When you go through an entire day and you did nothing that made you feel happy, that's a problem. Not only for your mental health, but it can affect your gut too. So we do so much more than supplements. We do so much more than diet. We want you to be the happiest, healthiest version of you. And so that is talking about the gut. And of course, it's talking about the brain too. But I will have clients sometimes do experiments where, we think about a day that they had the worst gut symptoms, right? And immediately they're like, I think it's because I went to this restaurant and they said it was gluten-free, but I don't think it was gluten-free, and they're going down this rabbit hole of what if it was probably this, it was a crumb over there, it was that. And I'm like, tell me about your day. Like, what did it look like? And they start walking through this horrendous day. It is always like,
they did their
I almost
taxes
got
earlier that morning.
Yeah. It's always something stressful. Always. Oh, I got in a fight with my spouse. There was a deadline at work that I was, so close to missing, and then people were over here, or I turned this in, and then it's always this stressor. Or my kids were on level 9 that day. And I'm like, girl, I hear you, right? Like, it is hard to calm down when your kids are like constantly heightening you, right? So it's getting them to understand that perhaps it has nothing to do with food. It has maybe even nothing to do with them missing their supplements for that day, and everything to do with what's going on up here. Another great example of this is I have a client who I've been working with for several months, and she was very always looking at like, what food was it, right? And she's been on these supplements. The minute we would wean her off of these supplements, she would be like, oh, I had symptoms. We're like, okay, well, let's put you back on it, just like a little bit, right? And we're trying to wean her off. She goes on vacation for a week, forgets her supplements, doesn't take any supplements that week, is eating food that she would never dream of eating at home. And guess how many gut symptoms she had? 0. None. Yeah. And that was without her supplements and with eating whatever she wanted.
Yeah, I was going to say, vacation food's usually not the best kind of food.
Exactly. It's like, you're in a non-controlled environment. And again, not taking those supplements that she thought was the reason every time we weaned, that was the problem. Right. And she never made this connection on her own until we hopped on a call and we start talking about it. And I'm like, okay, so do you see what's happening here? Like, do you understand? Like, tell me how you were feeling on vacation. Oh, it was amazing. And we woke up and we did this, and I didn't even have to cook. Like, I just showed up and I got fed. And I'm like, yeah, do you see that whole scenario? Right. So how do we bring vacation to you at home? Because now we know it's not the supplements that are making you feel better. Maybe it was in the beginning because she had some real imbalances that we had to balance, right? And we did have to do things with her diet. We did have to shift into a place of abundance and healing for the gut. But maybe now that's all fixed, and it really is this that's driving everything. And she was the perfect example. And so until that moment, that was such a good aha moment for her, because she was like, I get it. Like, you've been telling me all along that stress is an issue, but now I really see it, right? Like, now I can 100% understand that I wasn't controlling my diet. I wasn't taking my supplements, and I felt amazing. So now we're in a place with her where we're looking at how can we bring vacation, a little bit of vacation, home? Is that starting slower in the morning? Is it changing dinner routines? Is it setting boundaries at work? Because she wasn't working, and that's a big stressor for her. And so really getting specific too, sometimes we do look at the job and we say, have you thought about finding another job, right? If this is such a huge issue for you, what are our options? It's worth looking at. We're not going to force you to quit your job, but it's a huge piece. So sometimes it is about an imbalance or an infection or something that needs a really targeted supplement protocol and really targeted lifestyle changes. But sometimes we just have to change what's going on up here. And sometimes that can actually be that clients are anticipating symptoms and it's creating physical symptoms. So this is particularly important for my clients who swear up and down that they have all of these real, true food intolerances. And then we do some experiments, right? And we talk about how do we view food as completely objective. Instead of looking at that bagel and saying, Do I want that bagel? I'm going to be in the bathroom all day. Is it worth it? I don't know. Do I want it? You're stressed around that bagel. What do you think is going to happen the second you take a bite of that bagel? You're like, okay, we got 20 minutes. Okay, 20 minutes. I'm going to be okay, what do we do? I'm about to have gut symptoms. I can't do that because I'm going to have, and our mind is like, my gosh. And we wonder why we have gut symptoms. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you're panicked about that bagel causing gut symptoms, you're going to have gut symptoms, right? And I think sometimes that experiment will have them do, and they realize it was really their mind all along. And again, I'm not dismissing. Sometimes it is actually a true food intolerance, but you can't forget about how your mind is creating physical symptoms in the body too. It's fascinating.
Absolutely. And we're fortunate enough to have Barry Goldstein joining us for a
Yes.
session later on, and he'll get real deep into all those things. So
Mm-hmm.
for everybody who's watched this and is kind of new to gut health and may just feel a little overwhelmed with all the information, what are a couple of actionable things that somebody could do today to kind of move themselves along on their...
A really great start is you got some free registration gifts simply for registering for this, because I wanted you to have actionable steps that you could take today, so that when you're hearing these talks, you're like, oh my gosh, gut health is an issue. I wanted you to have actionable things that you could look at and implement. So make sure you're looking at those bonus registration gifts. But to kind of sum things up, I think of it in a couple of different buckets. Number one is nutrition. So not what food do we eliminate? It's not a gluten-free, dairy-free diet. It's looking at variety. It's looking at even your eating environment. Are you eating in a calm, relaxed state? Are you chewing appropriately? That is all really important. And then again, focusing on variety, and are you getting enough protein? Are you getting enough healthy fats? We need all of that for our body to repair itself. So that's one piece. Take a good hard look at your nutrition. The other piece is really trying to see food as objective. And instead of getting really judgy about symptoms and feeling like I have to find the fix now, getting just curious about it. So having a gut symptom and saying, that's interesting. I feel a little bloated. What happened earlier today? Was I stressed? Was I chewing? Was I distracted? I think those connections, you can make so many connections on your own. And you are the one who will know the most about your body. You are the expert on your body. And so trusting yourself to really connect those dots is really important. The other piece is stress management. It's really taking it seriously and figuring out, where are my stressors? What are the things I can change? Like ask for help. Where can I set boundaries? And then what are things you can't change? And then how do we change your perception of the stress? Right. And this is exactly what Ori Goldstein is going to be on here talking. This is exactly what we do in our Shift community, which is a partnership with myself and Ori Goldstein, is all about how do we create these stress-free lives, but at a deeper level. It's not so easy to be like, oh, just journal, just read, just light a candle and take a bubble bath, right? It's like, okay, that might make you feel good in the moment, but you're going to have to keep doing those self-care activities unless you deal with the root cause of the stress. And again, if it's something you can't change, then it's time to change your mindset around it. You can change how you react to the stressor. And again, I know it sounds weird because we're supposed to be talking about gut health, but I've been doing this for so many years, and I can tell you that might solve all of your issues, right? And if you're here and you're like, Brittany, okay, my nutrition's pretty good. I'm managing stress. I'm chewing really well. That might be a time that you want to dive deeper. So maybe dialing in, if you tend towards constipation, let's look at your fiber and your fluids. Let's get really specific about, are you getting close to the 25 grams? If you tend towards looser stools, again, looking really hard at stress, looking really hard at chewing, at eating in a relaxed state. I think those things are going to be really paramount to you. And then also just figuring out what is your root cause, because I could line up 10 people with bloating today and they're all going to have a slightly different cause. So if you feel like you're checking off all of the basics, I really encourage you to take our root cause assessment quiz, which again, you got for free as a registrant for this summit, to determine what your root cause might be. And I include action steps based on what your imbalance might be. So again, I want you to have all of the first steps, and you might be able to fix this on your own, right? Like you might be able to find the solve. And when you get stuck, that's when you bring someone else on board. That's when you dive deeper. That's when you pull in the stool testing, which we're going to talk about at a later session. But first, it's the foundations.
Seems like a great place to end this presentation. You'll have another one towards the end of the summit. Anything else you want to add before we sign off?
I don't think so. I think if you're not following along Instagram at Dietitian Brittany, I have a ton of free content on there. I love interacting on there. So if you want to message me any aha moments or any questions, I'm there to support you. So I'd love to see you over there.
Sounds great. And it should also be noted that anybody who purchases the VIP pass will get lifetime access to all of these recordings. And we will also be putting out a formal book in PDF form that you can download to your Kindle. And that will be forthcoming after the summit. So thanks, everybody. And we'll catch you in the next video.